Hello. I wanted to record something in response to a couple of posts that I got following a blog article that I put out recently. So the blog article was about various things, including a place called St Nectan's Glen, where I'm going to be running some retreats this year. And the picture of the glen showed ribbons hanging from a tree. And that's because if you go to St Nectan's Glen, which is in North Cornwall, you'll find quite a lot of these ribbons hung from the trees as offerings, as prayers essentially. And one of the things that kind of came up in some of the responses to this particular post, which are things that I've seen raised elsewhere before, was the idea that this was a terribly bad thing, tying ribbons on a tree. And the various reasons that are given for this. One is that it's a cultural appropriation. So the tradition of tying ribbons on trees, at least in the British Isles, is often described. They're often described as clooties or clouties, and these are things which are found at Madron Well, down in Cornwall, and also more particularly in Scotland, which is, as I understand it, where the word itself comes from. The word is meaning cloth, essentially. And particularly in Scotland, there's a tradition in many places of the pieces of cloth being placed in the water, being then tied onto trees, and this being a healing or devotional kind of practice. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the other reason that's given is that, as well as this being a traditional sort of practice and it being a cultural appropriation, but that it's also bad for the environment, it's bad for the trees, it leaves stuff hanging around in an otherwise pristine and beautiful woodlands. And I have some time for both of these sets of ideas, and I'm sure that they spring from some very heartfelt thoughts. But I think that they're wrong. And the reason I think that they're wrong is that if you look at the tradition of hanging things on trees, anyone who's ever had a Christmas tree will know that this is not an uncommon idea. It's also something that you'll find appearing in Buddhist cultures in many, many different locations. In places like Thailand, you'll see this. In places like India, you'll see this within Hindu cultures. So the idea of tying a thing on a tree, whether it's a Catholic devotional practice or whether or not it's a neo-pagan revival, doesn't really matter. It's a fairly obvious thing to do. So it's not a specific thing. And I don't think anyone who's tying ribbons on a tree in, say, Devon would be pretending that they were Cornish. It's unlikely. So I think that the act of making a devotion in this way is a fairly straightforward human given. And whilst it may have been that the people who were tying these ribbons in Cornwall, in North Cornwall, at St Nectan's Glen, had been inspired by Madron Well, been inspired by these other places, nevertheless, I think it's fair that they're not aping them, but they are just enacting a very straightforward way of making prayerful relations with a place. Now, the second point, the point about the damage to the site, is very interesting as well. Obviously, damage is in the eye of the beholder to some extent, and of course, without damage, without things being left, archaeology would be a pretty boring business. So, obviously, if one is a pagan or if one's being thoughtful about the spirit of the site, whatever one's kind of spiritual identity, you'd hope that people would think about, well, what's the impact of my offering to this site? If my offering is a song, possibly very little. If my offering is a ribbon around a tree, that's more significant. I might be harming the tree, I might be harming the plants and animals around this place. I'm certainly leaving something that's visually obvious to other creatures, particularly humans that come to this space. So if we're leaving a persistent offering in a place, one would like to think that people are thoughtful about that. Sometimes it is necessary, needed, for whatever reason, to leave something that will be persistent, that's going to last. But there are ways of doing this that are more or less easy for the landscape to absorb. So if you're leaving a ribbon, leave something that's made from an organic material and is going to decay relatively quickly. Also accept the fact that in many places, including St Nectan's Glen, the caretakers of those sites will come and they will respectfully remove many of those ribbons during the winter months. They will dispose of them in a really good way, allowing space for people to do this, because this is a natural human desire. And whether or not we conceptualise it as something that we do because we happen to be Celts, or whether or not we happen to do because we're Buddhists, I think doesn't really matter. Certainly we need to be thoughtful about the site, certainly need to be consider the effect that we have. But should we be allowed to tie ribbons on trees as a devotional practice? I think the answer to that is clearly yes. Ahoy.